Talk about coming out of nowhere. Marvel Comics yesterday announced that they were doing a two-part X-Men Captain Marvel crossover story, which 2 parts, but it's only 2 issues. Turns out that's not exactly what's going on here. Marvel Comics are just in shambles when it comes to events and these like big long-form stories that include multiple titles. They never really work out these days, and you can tell there's almost no thought put into it whatsoever. There's no like planning, like this is logically where this story needs to go. This week we did get a Kieran Gillen interview on Adventures in Poor Taste, and I think he kind of explains it pretty well. He was asked, how did Axe Judgment Day come about? How did you come up with the idea for this big crossover? This was his answer. I was asked if I had an idea for an event by Tom Brevoort. I looked at the pieces and realized that they could be reassembled into something that was significantly more overt, especially if I brought in a lot of other elements. Because that shitty Axe Judgment Day story is supposed to be an Eternal story. That's what he mapped it out as. That's what he pitched it as. But Marvel Comics and Tom Brevoort needed an event, so they decided to just jumble a bunch of crap together, and we see what the result of that is. A very shitty, very mediocre event. I thought the reason during Dark Web, the X-Men titles weren't really crossing over into the event, they're doing like special Dark Web X-Men issues, is because maybe writer Jerry Duggan just introduced his new X-Men team. They wanted to flesh them out and do something with them. It turns out they're actually going to do a big crossover event with Captain Marvel. Who asked for this? Who in their right minds have been reading Marvel Comics for the last 2 or 3 years said, you know what? It really feels like they're moving towards a Captain Marvel X-Men event. Nobody, because they haven't done any of the groundwork to actually do this. Captain Marvel and the X-Men are flashing back to the crossover from the early 80s that originally made Carol Danvers an ally of Marvel's X-Men, a 2-part crossover that will move from Captain Marvel's titles to the X-Men ongoing series in February will team the heroes in another fight against Marvel's aliens-like race, the Brood. I'm just champing at the bit, just waiting to see what Jerry Duggan and Kelly Thompson can come up with when they finally join forces for a big crossover event. Said nobody in the history of the comic book reading world at this point. Why are they doing this? Simply because they needed to do something. They needed to put something on the map. And yes, 40 years ago, Carol Danvers, when she was Miss Marvel and became binary, was certainly associated with the X-Men. There's a very good story involving Rogue, which could lead to some real tension between the characters, but they've never really played it out since Carol Danvers became Captain Marvel. She's her own thing and is never, ever associated with the X-Men at this moment in time. She's strictly associated with the Avengers. Kelly Thompson has done some really amazing stuff on that run as well. How many times has she taken the X-Men heroes that we know, like Iron Man, Captain America, even Black Panther, had them possessed or maybe made clones of them and let Carol Danvers destroy them or kill them? I think in one part, Carol Danvers actually became possessed so she could kill them on her own, just to let us know that if it happens, Carol Danvers can destroy all the Avengers on her own. I cannot wait to see what Jerry Duggan does when we have Wolverine interacting with Carol Danvers. That dude does not know how to write strong female heroes. If you want a good example of that, go read his last X-Men story arc before he had the new team introduced in the latest Hellfire Gala. It was absolutely embarrassing what Jerry Duggan did with those 3 strong female heroes in that story arc. Just embarrassing stuff. We will not know where Carol Danvers ends and Wolverine begins because his nose is going to be so far up her ass, telling her just how amazing she is. We haven't seen Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers validated enough in Marvel Comics these days. I'm cringing right now just seeing the page that I know Jerry Duggan is going to put in this comic book. November 9th, Captain Marvel 43 just kicked off a story in which Carol has ventured into space to fight the Brood. That story, titled Revenge of the Brood, is actually the first part of a 2-part crossover with Captain Marvel and the X-Men, which continues through January's Captain Marvel 45. Then the action flips over to the X-Men franchise for Lord of the Brood, the second chapter in the 2-part crossover starting in February's X-Men number 19. Continuing into February 15th, Captain Marvel 46, it continues into March as well, with March 8th's X-Men number 20 and March 15th's Captain Marvel number 47. Then April's Captain Marvel number 48 and X-Men number 21 form the penultimate chapters of the story, which concludes in an oversized Captain Marvel number 49. My goodness, when I see 2-part story, 2-part crossover, I think 2 issues. This is at least 9 issues as far as the crossover goes. I guess it's a 2-part story because the story arcs themselves have different names, even though they're all one story. This is absolutely ridiculous. We literally just finished Axe Judgment Day. What kicks off in a few weeks? Dark Web, the big crossover between X-Men and Spider-Man. And now we know another crossover has just started in the pages of Captain Marvel. Another crossover, might as well call it an event. It's fucking 9 issues at this point. It's pretty much an event of itself. Why should I be excited for Dark Web or any of these other events when they continuously have these things going on at the exact same time? Which one's supposed to be important? If you're an X-Men fan, should you be reading the Spider-Man X-Men crossover Dark Web, or should you be reading the X-Men Captain Marvel crossover that's actually happening in the X-Men comics themselves? This is why Marvel Comics and the X-Men office are an absolute joke at this point. All they do are events. It's constantly event. They never lead up to anything. There's never any fallout to anything, and nothing ends up mattering whatsoever. CB Cebulski, Tom Brevoort, Jordan White need to pull their heads directly out of their asses, start listening to fans, and figure out that all these crossovers are meaningless. They've rendered nothing important within the Marvel Comics universe because they're constantly rolling them out and out and out. Because sales on X-Men are depressed right now, and it's really the only strategy that they have. What can we do to make sales better on X-Men? Well, let's cross them over with Captain Marvel, a character in a team that have had literally no interaction for like 5 or 6 years at this point. Even when the Avengers show up on Krakoa, which has happened several times during the Krakoan era of X-Men, Captain Marvel is almost never there, and if she is there, she almost never speaks. No one ever interacts with her, not even Rogue, who you would think would have quite the grudge with Carol Danvers. They never play into it, but all of a sudden, 40 years later, we're going to play into this stupid Brood story. The story will deal with the X-Men's former mutant Brood student, Brew, now the Brood King, while also introducing a new Brood Empress, an upgrade from the classic Brood Queen. Through the course of the story, Carol and the X-Men will have to sacrifice one of their own to the Brood. Looks like it's probably going to be Rogue, judging by the cover of December's Captain Marvel number 44. Jerry Duggan will handle the X-Men chapters, while Kelly Thompson will handle the Captain Marvel chapters through March. My, how exciting. Another crossover with a stupid story, a stupid premise. Oh, and we're going to lose another X-Men. I wonder, will they resurrect the character as soon as she dies in the comic book? We've only seen this play out about 50 billion times at this point in the Krakoan era. There are no stakes, and the tease that they're going to kill off a major member of the Marvel Comics universe is just laughable at this point. In fact, if you go and read Axe Judgment Day, they could now not only resurrect mutants, they can also resurrect select humans if they choose to do so. See also Steve Rogers. I definitely want to hear from you guys. Are you excited about this? Jerry Duggan and Kelly Thompson crossing over? It's like a superpowered comic book writing team, right? This is what everybody has been clamoring for. That's what I want to see the direction of the X-Men. More events, more crossovers, more stagnated stories in the actual X-Men comics because they're so busy doing everything but X-Men at this point. It's just ridiculous. Marvel Comics have an event problem. Marvel Comics X-Men have an enormous event problem. They are absolutely addicted to it. It's like opium to these guys. They cannot kick the habit at this point. Event fatigue is real. It is set in on the X-Men fans. Definitely check this one out. Great conversation. If you don't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.